Welcome to Reformed Thinking. It is really good to have you with us for this deep dive. If you look around at the world today, or honestly just look in the mirror, you see a society that is absolutely obsessed with the hustle. We are driven by this relentless pragmatism, this need to maximize every single second for productivity. If you aren't producing, you aren't valuable. That is the water we swim in.
It's the air we breathe, really. And it is completely exhausting.
It is. And naturally, the conversation usually turns to work-life balance or self-care. Take a break so you don't burn out. But today, we are doing something quite different. We are looking at a topic that cuts right across that cultural narrative, but not for the reasons you might think. We are talking about Sabbath-breaking.
Right. And just to set the stage immediately, this is not a discussion about wellness. We aren't going to give you tips on how to recharge your batteries so you can go back to work on Monday and make more money. We are looking at two heavy-hitting theological texts today, ceasing from rebellion and profaning holy time.
And the twist here, which I think is going to surprise some people, is how these sources define Sabbath breaking. We usually think of it as just, well, not doing something. I didn't rest. I failed to stop. But these texts frame it as a sin of action. It is described as an active rebellion against God.
That is the core tension we need to unpack. Our mission today is to look at the Reformed view of the Lord's Day, adhering to the Westminster Confession, and to understand why resting is actually a fierce battleground for lordship over our lives. It is really about who owns your time.
So let's get into this concept of a sin of action, because like I said, if I skip church or I check my email on Sunday, I usually categorize that as a sin of omission. I should have rested, but I didn't. Why do these scholars insist on calling it a sin of commission?
It is a critical distinction. The sources explain that Sabbath breaking is doing what God actively forbids. It isn't just a passive slip-up. When you engage in unnecessary labor or commerce on the Lord's Day, you are taking a positive step to transgress a boundary God set. One of the authors uses a phrase that really stops you in your tracks. He calls it practical atheism.
Practical atheism, that feels like a massive leap. I mean, checking an email is annoying, maybe it's bad for my stress levels, but atheism, that implies I'm denying the existence of God. How do they justify that charge?
It sounds severe, I know, but follow the logic. If you feel you cannot stop working for 1 day out of 7, what are you saying? You are acting as if God cannot sustain the world or even your own household without your constant input. You are acting as if the universe depends on your hustle. You're declaring with your actions that you do not trust divine providence to keep you fed and safe if you lay down your tools. You might confess God with your mouth on Sunday morning, but your calendar saying that it's all up to me.
Okay, that lands a bit harder. It is the idea that if I stop spinning the plates, they will all crash and God won't catch them.
Precisely. It exposes the idol of self-reliance. And this ties into the concept of time itself. We tend to think of time as a neutral container. I have 24 hours, you have 24 hours, and we just fill them. But the sources argue that time is not morally neutral. God owns time.
This is the distinction between holy and common, right?
Yes, that is it. There is holy time, which is set apart by God for His specific use, and there is common time given to us for our work and recreation. When we break the Sabbath, we are profaning the day. To profane something literally means to make it common. We are taking what God stamped as holy and His, and we are seizing it for our own personal gain or pleasure. We are stealing time.
It is like using the communion cup to drink your morning orange juice. You are taking something set apart and treating it like it is just another piece of dishware.
That is a solid analogy. And to understand why this matters, we have to go back to the very beginning. The theology of rest doesn't start with Moses. It starts with Genesis 2. The text says God rested on the 7th day. Now, did God rest because He was tired?
No, He is omnipotent. He doesn't get muscle fatigue.
Right. The sources highlight that God's rest was not recuperation. It was enthronement. It was a sovereign celebration of completion. He finished His work, looked at it, saw it was very good, and took His seat as the king over creation. So the command in Exodus 20 isn't just a Jewish ceremonial law that pops up out of nowhere. It is a creation ordinance. It is woven into the very fabric of how the world was made.
So when we rest, we aren't just taking a nap. We are mimicking the king.
We are acknowledging the king. We are stopping to say that He is God, and I am not.
That sets the stakes pretty high. This isn't just about a calendar. It is about cosmology. Let's get into the text itself. Our sources spend a lot of time on the exegetical anchors. They dig into the Hebrew and the Greek to show us what is really going on. Let's look at the Old Testament first, specifically Exodus 20.
The key Hebrew term here is Shabbat,
which we know as Sabbath, but often we just translate that in our heads as Saturday or church day. What is the actual linguistic root?
It denotes a cessation or a desisting. It is a full stop.
Hmm.
And the context is fascinating because the author compares it to the ancient Near Eastern culture. The Babylonians, for instance, had a concept called Shabbatu.
Sounds similar. Was it the same thing?
It sounds similar phonetically, but the theology is the complete opposite. For the pagans, Shabbatu was a day of bad luck, or a day to appease angry, capricious gods. You stopped working because you were afraid the gods would smack you if you did anything. It was a day of dread.
So it was basically like, don't move or the gods will see you.
Spot on.
Mm-hmm.
But Yahweh Shabbat is a sovereign celebration. It is not about appeasement. It is about acknowledging completion and goodness. And then there's the word used for the command itself, Zator, remember?
I found this really interesting in the notes. The source says this isn't just a mental note, like, oh yeah, it's Sunday.
No, not at all. Grammatically, it is an infinitive absolute. That implies intensity. It means a vigorous, active setting apart of the day. It implies forethought. You cannot remember the Sabbath if you wake up on Sunday morning with no plan, your house in chaos, and your schedule full. Remembering starts days before. It is an active engagement of the will to protect that time.
And there was another Hebrew word distinction the source made about why the text doesn't use the word nuash.
Yes, this is a specific detail the text points out. Nuash is a Hebrew word that means settling down from weariness, like taking a load off your back because you are exhausted. Exodus 20 does not use nuash to describe God's rest or the primary command. It uses jabba sheb. Again, God doesn't get tired. The focus is on a judicial ceasing. It is a legal stop. The judge bangs the gavel and says that court is adjourned. The work is done.
That really reinforces the idea that this isn't about physical recovery primarily. It is about status. It is about authority. But I want to push on this a bit because a lot of listeners are thinking, okay, that is Exodus. That is the Old Covenant. We are New Testament Christians. How do the sources bridge that gap?
That is the most common objection. The sources take us to Hebrews 4, which is arguably the definitive text on the Christian Sabbath. The argument in Hebrews is that there is a rest that the people of God must enter.
And there is a specific Greek word there that matters, right? Sabbatismos.
Yes. The author of Hebrews has a few words for rest available to him. He uses katapausis quite a bit, which is a general word for ceasing. But in Hebrews 4.9, when he says, there remains therefore a rest for the people of God, he switches to sabbatismos. This is a very rare word. It literally means a Sabbath keeping.
So he is explicitly linking the Christian's eternal rest back to the Sabbath.
He is anchoring the theology of Sunday worship and our eternal hope right back to the creation Sabbath of Genesis. He is saying the principle hasn't changed. The day has shifted to mark the resurrection, yes, but the moral obligation and the spiritual privilege of a Sabbath keeping remains. It is a direct line from Eden to the New Jerusalem.
And this brings us to the Westminster Confession of Faith. We are Reformed thinking, after all. How does this align with the confessional standard? Because I think people get nervous when we talk about Old Testament law. They think we're going to start advocating for civil penalties.
That is a fair fear, given history. But the confession is very clear on what we call the Israel Church distinction. This helps us avoid the weird legalism people get scared of. The confession acknowledges that the civil penalties, getting stoned for picking up sticks, those apply to national Israel as a theocratic state. Those are gone.
We can all be thankful for that. So no one is advocating for state-enforced Sabbath laws here.
Indeed. But the moral equity, the underlying principle of 1 day in 7 set apart for God, applies to all men in all ages. It didn't start with Moses, so it doesn't end with Moses. It is a creation ordinance. It is for humanity. The confession frames it as a gift that we are obligated to receive, not a burden we are forced to carry.
So we have established the what and the why theologically, but now we need to get uncomfortable. We need to talk about the who, specifically us. The next section of our outline deals with the idols beneath the surface. Why is it so hard for us to just stop?
This is the heart diagnostic. The sources argue that we don't break the Sabbath just because we have bad calendars. We break it because we have bad hearts. Sabbath-breaking is a symptom of hidden idolatry.
Let's run down the list provided in the text. The first one is the big one, productivity and self-worth.
I am what I produce. That is the mantra of the modern world. If I stop working, I am nothing. I have no value. This is a deep existential fear. We use work to justify our existence. The Sabbath strips that away. It forces you to sit there producing nothing and believe that you are still loved and valuable solely because you are God's child. For many people, that silence is terrifying.
It really is. It feels like disappearing. If I'm not answering the email, if I'm not fixing the house, do I even exist?
That is the question it forces. And that leads right into the second idol, control, and anxiety.
This goes back to that practical atheism we touched on earlier.
It does. The source argues that working on the Sabbath is an attempt to secure our own future. We are anxious about money, about our career trajectory, about falling behind. So we work to soothe that anxiety. We are trying to be our own providence. We trust our hustle more than we trust God's promise to provide daily bread. We look at the bank account and say that we need to work today to make sure this number goes up, effectively saying God won't handle it.
It is a trust issue. Then there is the idol of autonomy. Basically, don't tell me what to do.
The human heart hates submission. We want to be the captains of our own souls and the masters of our own calendars. To have God come in and say, no, this day is mine, you don't get a vote, is offensive to our pride. We break the Sabbath to prove to ourselves that we are in charge. It is a subtle rebellion. We tell ourselves we will go to church, but we will decide when we leave and what we do afterward.
And the fourth one hit me hard because it is so subtle. Pleasure and entertainment. Isaiah 58 talks about doing your own pleasure, and I think a lot of us think, well, isn't the Sabbath supposed to be pleasurable?
It is, but the question is what the pleasure is rooted in. Yeah. This is the conflict between delighting in the Lord and amusing ourselves to death. The source has a stinging critique here. It talks about the bored soul. The person who breaks the Sabbath by binging Netflix or scrolling social media for 6 hours isn't necessarily overworked. They are spiritually bored. They find God weighty, but not winsome. They don't know how to enjoy him, so they retreat to cheap entertainment.
Weighty, but not winsome. That is a heavy conviction. It forces you to ask yourself if you actually like God, or do you just respect him from a distance? Because if you like him, a day with him sounds great. If you just respect him, a day with him sounds like a long meeting.
Precisely. If you loved him, you would want the day with him. The idol here is preferring the created thing over the creator.
Okay, let's get into the weeds now. Let's look at specific manifestations. How do we actually break it? Because I think we are all pretty good at justifying our little exceptions. We say things like, oh, this is just a quick thing.
The sources are very specific here. The first manifestation is regarding public worship. And this isn't just skipping church completely. It is treating church as optional or as a spiritual add-on to the weekend. You know, I will go if we don't have a tournament, or I will go if I wake up in time.
Or showing up habitually late. I am guilty of this sometimes. I tell myself we missed the first song, no big deal.
Right. But the source points out habitual lateness or casualness toward the holy convocation. It signals that this meeting with the king is not the priority of the day. It is an afterthought. Imagine showing up late to a meeting with the president or your biggest client every single time. It sends a message.
Then there is unnecessary labor. And the key word there is unnecessary. Because obviously, some things have to happen.
We have to distinguish between works of necessity and mercy, which are lawful and convenience. The source targets catch-up work. This is huge for the modern knowledge worker. Clearing the inbox on Sunday nights so Monday isn't so bad.
Right.
Helping the kids with homework that could have been done Saturday. Home improvement projects that aren't urgent repairs, but just projects.
It is fear-based work, usually. I'm afraid of Monday, so I will rob Sunday to pay for it.
Yes, and it denies the rest God gave you.
Yeah.
Then there is commerce, buying and selling.
The Nehemiah 13 precedent. This is a tough one for modern people because we're so used to the 2047 economy.
Nehemiah actually locked the gates of Jerusalem to keep the merchants out. The ethical implication here is massive. When we shop or dine out on the Lord's Day, we are requiring others to work for our leisure. We are effectively denying them their rest. We are participating in a system that says commerce is more valuable than worship.
We become the pharaohs in that moment, demanding bricks so we can have a burger.
We do. And finally, there's a modern application the source calls the digital Sabbath breaker.
My phone.
Your phone. Mindless scrolling, gaming, constant news consumption. One of the sources makes a brilliant point. The phone pipelines the world's anxiety directly into your soul. You cannot have holy rest when you are hooked up to an IV drip of global chaos and outrage. It makes true rest impossible. You might be sitting on the couch, but your mind is running a marathon.
That is painfully accurate. I can sit still for 2 hours, but if I am doom scrolling, my heart rate is up, my cortisol is up, I haven't rested, I have just been paralyzed.
Well, I should say that is spot on. You are physically stationary, but spiritually frantic.
So we are all convicted. We are all Sabbath breakers in some way, whether it is our heart or our hands. This is where we need to pivot. We need the gospel remedy, because if we stop here, we are just crushed.
And that is the function of the law. The first use of the law is to crush our pride and show us we cannot keep the Sabbath perfectly. We are restless rebels. But that drives us to Christ, who is the Lord of the Sabbath.
We don't rest to earn salvation. I think that is the legalistic trap, thinking if I sit still long enough, God will like me.
No, we rest because we have salvation. This is the crucial pivot. We have to look at the finished work of Christ. When Jesus cried out that it is finished on the cross, he was echoing the Genesis creation account. The work of redemption is done.
So our standing before God isn't based on how well we kept the Sabbath last Sunday.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Justification, our legal standing, is based entirely on Christ's obedience. He kept the Sabbath perfectly for us. He never engaged in self-reliance. He always delighted in the Father. And then he took the punishment for our Sabbath breaking. So when we rest, we are resting in his work, not our lack of work.
And this ties into why we worship on Sunday now, right? The resurrection focus.
Yes, the shift from the seventh day to the first day is monumental. It celebrates the new creation. The Old Testament Sabbath celebrated God finishing the material universe. The Christian Sabbath celebrates Christ conquering death and inaugurating the new heavens and the new earth. It is a victory party.
So now that we are saved and we aren't trying to earn God's love, what happens to the command? Does it go away?
No. This is the third use of the law. Now that we are saved, the command becomes a guide for gratitude. We keep the Sabbath not to get God to love us, but because he already does. We want to spend the day with him. It changes from a burden feeling like I have to stop to a privilege realizing I get to stop.
I love that framing, but I know there are listeners right now shouting at their speakers with objections. Our sources address these, the two ditches, legalism and antinomianism.
We have to steer the car carefully here. Legalism is adding man-made rules to God's law. This is the Pharisees, telling people you can't walk more than a certain number of steps. You can't lift a chair. The source explicitly rejects this. We are not calling for a return to misery.
But the other ditch is just as dangerous.
Antinomianism. This is the idea that grace means the law doesn't matter. It leads to that practical atheism we talked about. It uses grace as an excuse to ignore God's wisdom. The source argues that this isn't freedom, it is just slavery to your own impulses again.
What about the specific Bible verses people throw out? Romans 14, where it says, one man esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike.
The view in the text is that Paul is addressing Jewish ceremonial days, the feast days, the new moons that were part of national laws of Israel. He is not talking about the creation ordinance of the weekly Sabbath. That principle predates the ceremonial law. Context is everything there.
And Colossians 2. Let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths.
Similarly, the context is the shadows pointing to Christ. The ceremonial aspects, the sacrifices, the specific dietary restrictions connected to days, those are fulfilled. But the moral principle of a day of rest and worship remains. The source argues you can't use Colossians to erase one of the 10 Commandments.
And the big one. Jesus broke the Sabbath. We hear that a lot. People say Jesus picked grain so I can go to the mall.
We have to correct this.
Yeah.
Jesus never broke the law of God. If he had broken the 10 Commandments, he would be a sinner and couldn't be our Savior. What Jesus broke were the human traditions and the Pharisaical interpretations that had encrusted the Sabbath. He broke the rules that prevented mercy. He healed on the Sabbath. He fed his hungry disciples. He restored the true purpose of the day, mercy and necessity. He didn't abolish the Sabbath. He liberated it.
So if we are liberated, let's talk about what we actually do. Let's get into the positive application. I really like the phrase the Puritan source used, the market day of the soul.
It is a beautiful image. During the week, we go to the market for food and goods. Sunday's the day we go to the market for spiritual riches. We gather the resources, grace, truth, fellowship that will sustain us for the next 6 days. It is a day of stocking up, not emptying out.
And to do that, you have to be ready, the Saturday principle. This is the hardest part for me practically.
This is where the rubber meets the road. The command starts with remember. The source offers practical tips here. If you wait until Sunday morning to think about Sunday, you have already lost the battle. It suggests meal prep on Saturday, finishing your errands, laying out clothes, getting gas in the car.
It sounds mundane, but it prevents the Sunday morning chaos where everyone is yelling at each other trying to find a shoe.
Right. You are clearing the deck so that Sunday can be peaceful. You are protecting the holy time from the encroachment of the common.
And the center of the day is public and private worship?
The gathered church is non-negotiable. It is where the word is preached and the sacraments are administered. But it extends to the home, too. Family piety, catechizing the kids, singing hymns, discussing the sermon over lunch instead of just talking about sports or politics. It is about keeping the conversation Godward.
Now, we mentioned necessity and mercy earlier. Let's clarify that so people don't think they can't help a neighbor.
It is lawful to do good. The texts stress this. Visiting the sick, caring for the vulnerable. Essential services if you are a nurse, a police officer, a firefighter, that is work of necessity and mercy. The litmus test the source provides is helpful. Does this activity promote worship and love for neighbor, or does it promote self-indulgence?
That is the filter. Is this for me or for him and them?
Yes. It is not about a list of forbidden activities. It is about the goal of the day.
This has been a heavy, but I think liberating deep dive. We have gone from the hustle of the modern world to the stillness of the throne room.
And that is the path we need to take every 7 days.
So let's wrap this up with the central idea.
The central idea is this. Because Christ has purchased our rest with his own blood, we actively reject the idolatry of labor. We refuse to bow down to the gods of productivity and anxiety. We keep the Sabbath not to earn heaven, but because we are citizens of heaven.
And that final thought on the eternal Sabbath.
Our weekly rest is a foretaste. Every time we stop, every time we gather to sing, we are rehearsing for the end of history. We are practicing for the day when all striving ceases and we are fully at rest in the presence of God.
Here is the challenge I want to leave you with, listener. The world says you must be constantly on to survive. It screams at you that if you stop, you will fall. Christ says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Who will you believe this Sunday?
That is the real question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Reformed thinking. We will see you next time.